Hey y'all, my name is Carisa Lopez. I am the political director for the Texas Freedom Network. The primary elections are right around the corner, so I'm here talking Primary 101 with a few Texas Rising students. But first,
are you registered to vote? If you're not sure, check out txrising.org to make sure. But do it soon though, the deadline is coming up.
That's right, the last day to register to vote is February 3rd, with early voting starting from February 18th to February 28th, and official election day for the primary election being March 3rd. And if there's a case in the runoff, that election will be May 26th.
So once we're registered, how do we know where to head out to the polls?
so you can visit your county elections website. That's going to vary depending on where you live. And then you'll also need to make sure you have an acceptable form of ID, and you can visit the Secretary of State's website for that information.
So what is a primary?
So a primary is an election that happens every 2 years where you choose the nominee for each party. So there's a Democratic primary, there's a Republican primary, and they choose the nominees for everything from district attorney to state senator to president.
So can anyone who can vote in a primary?
Depends on where you live. In Texas, we have open primaries, which means as long as you're registered to vote, you don't have to register with a specific party. So you can vote in either the Democratic or the Republican.
So can I vote in both of them?
No, so you can only vote in one, but you can pick and choose which one. So for example, you could vote in 2020, you could vote in a different primary than maybe you voted in 2018.
So are primary elections just for presidential elections or for others as well?
So you vote for everything from state house to district attorney. In Texas, we elect judges on primary elections, to governor every 4 years, and president. So it's very important that you get out and vote in the primary election because there's a lot of down ballot candidates as well that are counting on your vote.
But we only vote for president every 4 years.
Correct. So every 4 years, you're going to have a presidential election, but every 2 years, there's still a primary election where you will have a lot of other candidates on your ballot.
So primaries are an opportunity to pick the candidate for November?
Correct. The candidates that win the primary elections will go on to be on the general ballot in November. And this is really a chance for voters to shape their party. You'll have more moderate candidates, you'll have more progressive candidates, and this is where your opportunity to cast your ballot for the candidate that stands for your values within the party. This is your chance to do that. There's also, you'll see some issues on your ballot for or against, for example, Medicare for all, for or against certain immigration policy. And this also helps inform the party platform.
So what are the requirements for candidates running for office? Do they have to adhere to a certain platform, or how far away or close do they have to be to it?
So each party does have a platform, an issues platform that guide the party. Technically, a candidate doesn't have to align very much with it. All the more reason, though, that it's really important to vote and engage in primary elections. So you can elect candidates for your party that align with your values and align with the values of your party.
So can anyone be on the ballot? How do you get on it?
So there's a filing period, and you have to file by the deadline, and you do file for office with either your county party or your state party. There are certain requirements depending on the office that you're seeking, like age, for example, depending on if you're running for state senator, governor, etc. And then you either have to pay a filing fee, so you do have to pay, or you can get a certain number of signatures to be on the ballot from people in your district.
So are these paid positions? Can anyone run a working class person, or?
It's gonna depend on the office that you're seeking. For example, state house and state senate positions really don't pay much. So it is hard for working class people to be elected to the Texas legislature because it doesn't pay a living wage. Therefore, you do see the representation skewed toward people who are independently wealthy.
Is there any way that we can find unbiased information about candidates?
You can go to their websites, which is going to be obviously a little bit biased, but you do have like the League of Women Voters. They'll publish information about each candidate depending on where you live. Maybe your local paper will have information. Texas Rising, depending on the race, will do some voter guides as well. So if there's an organization that is civically engaged in your community, a lot of the times they might have voter guides for candidates in your community as well.
So there aren't like voter guides provided by the state like in California?
Correct. The state only does the bare minimum and tells you when elections are. You can go to the website, the Secretary of State's website, and find certain information like the names of candidates, but not any information about them.
So I registered to vote, voted in the primaries, went to the polls. What happens now?
So first, if no single candidate gets at least 50% of the vote, then the top 2 candidates from that race will go on to a runoff election. So those top 2 candidates will go head to head again in May, and then the winner of that election will become the nominee.
How do we know when runoff elections are going to happen?
So for regular primary elections, the state does set the date for the runoff ahead of time. This year, it is May 26th.
So what happens in the presidential primaries? What happens next after that?
So if you want to be involved in the presidential election to a further extent, if you want to be involved in shaping your party's platform, making the rules for the party, get involved in your local county convention, your state convention, and even the national convention. That's where a lot of decisions made for the parties and the inner workings of each individual party happen. So you'll go to your county convention, your state convention, and then maybe even your national convention, which ultimately is where the presidential nominee is chosen. So I am a Texas Rising graduate, was a fellow Texas Rising student. It's how I became civically engaged. I know that you're out in the field doing really important work, talking to students every day. What's one thing that you think you'll take away and tell people that you're interacting with?
I think telling different students that you can get involved in these conventions and you can become part of the process more so than just going in and voting. Because voting, of course, is important. But sometimes it's like, well, how does this all operate? And the fact that you can go in there and be part of that process is really important, I think, to have young people in that position.
Yeah, and not only young people, but working class people. I didn't know that people in elected office weren't paid living wages. So that means that those kinds of offices are inaccessible to us, which is why it's so important for us to be there every single step of the political process. We need to be more engaged so that at some point people who are working are actually in office and are able to represent our values as working class people.
There are a lot of barriers to young people being engaged in the political process. So the work that Texas Rising is doing is so important because we're never going to make changes that affect young people if young people aren't there every step of the way. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about primary elections and know a little bit more than you did when you got here. Now, get out and vote!
Well, if you're running independent, is it just like a bunch of people running independent?
So independent is different, but you have Green Party and Libertarian, which are technically parties. Independent is like completely free of all those parties.
Really?